Okay, this is a short demo for my friend Nick on wonderful cartoonist for the Washington Post, and I'm just going to do a condensed version of how to start a still life. I've got a full palette of colors here. You don't need to use all these colors to get started. Really, the principal primaries are, of course, essential. It's good to have a couple of versions of each of the colors, one leaning towards the warm end of the spectrum, one leaning towards the cool end of the spectrum, and I'm just going to dive right in. So I've set this up in such a way that you get the silhouette of the shadow notes against the light, and those are the principles you use in Impressionist painting. I have an example down here of a landscape I did. Can you get that shot? Can you see that? Is that a yes from the camera lady? Okay, so as you see here, even though you have complex forms, it still breaks down into patterns of light and shade, light and shade, light and shade. So that's what we're studying in an elemental way with the simple studies, and these are the kind of simple setups we used up at the Cape School when I studied with Henry Hensche. So the way I start is, and I'm just going to kind of wing it here, is I just throw up color in the, let's start with the shadow note of the pink block, and I use the flat of the knife to mix the color, and I use the edge of the knife to carry the color across the board. So, okay, and I try to stay away from the edges at first because I want to be able to mix into those large shapes of color. Okay, so let's put the shadow note of the green block here. This is the cast shadow from the pink block. It's turning it a little bit green because it's getting some cool color from the sky. So I'll kind of state it pretty boldly at first. We can state it boldly at first and then come back and adjust the color. So I divide the light and shade, so I'm going to get the little corner that's in light here. Okay, little corner that's in light. We got the little corner that's in light here. This is the cast shadow on the yellow block. The upright plane of the yellow block is a little bit warmer than that cast shadow because it's getting some kickback from the reflective colors that surround it. It's kicking back into that shadow note there. All right, I'm going to go over here. Here's a, Hensche told us to go from note to adjacent note. So you're kind of putting it together like a jigsaw puzzle. It's kind of a violet-y color of some sort. I use quinacridone pigments to mix my violets with. If you want a duller violet, you mix your cadmium reds with your blue. You can get a duller violet like that. Let's just throw this up here and see what it looks like. I can already tell it's maybe a little too purpley, so we can modify with some white. So like I say, you can always adjust. Now this outside shadow note is a more complex note. It's picking up a lot of colors that surround it. The blue of the sky is really influencing that interior note, and it's bouncing, the colors bounce against themselves, so they kind of reinforce each other. Here you have a more complex note. I'm just going to throw some colors together. I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre. Just to give it that warmth. Keep the camera rolling here. I'm just going to block, sometimes I block the sunlight coming in the back of my easel with a roll of paper towels. Okay, so we got that shadow. Using the edge of the knife to carry the color across the board. I use Liquitex gesso on the boards because it has a little bit of grip to it. Gives a little bit of grip to the color. Okay, we have beautiful cast shadow here. I don't know what color it is. A lot of times I don't know what color it is. I just start putting colors up and then see where it needs to go. Okay, it looks like it's a neat color because look, it's getting a cooler reflection of the sky here, and then here it gets a little warmer. So we can acknowledge those differences as the study progresses. This might be a little high key. Here again, I'm kind of condensing the stages a bit because I want to work rapidly so that you can get an idea of kind of my thinking processes as we go. A little bit of blue there. Let's put some cast shadow there. Make that a little stronger. It should be stronger. Now we go light plane here. Lord knows what that light plane is. Let's just start somewhere. That's a little too yellow. The cool thing about using a palette knife is that you can mix right in and adjust the color. Notice when I adjust the color, excuse me, I try to keep it pretty much the same value as I mix different colors in. So I started off with yellow, and then I wanted to mix some green in to adjust it. So in my palette, I added some white to that. Okay, so let's spring up here. Notice I'm working note to adjacent note, like the colors in a jigsaw puzzle. That's kind of greenish back there, but it's got a lot of warmth, and we're actually getting kind of a glare effect, almost like standing on the water with the sunlight glowing, throwing highlights up on the water. So we get a little bit of that effect going too. That's a little bit cool. I mean, yeah, a little bit cool. So I can warm it off now. We'll come back and adjust. So, you know, you're kind of constructing the light environment that the objects exist in. And Hensche used to call that the light key. Light key was a terminology that artists used more frequently in the past. Low key, high keys, cloudy day versus sunny day, early morning light versus late afternoon light. That's the different light keys of nature. So this is a pretty complex note that with that light bouncing off the table, and you probably can't get the true essence of it with one pass, but this is a start. This is how Hensche told us to start. Okay, we got just a little bit of light creeping around on this little corner here of the white pan. So let's just kind of acknowledge that with a little dollop of color there. I kind of hit it pretty warm with just a straight kind of scarlet out of the tube, but here again we can adjust that. I'm just, you know, I'm just indicating the general direction of it. I wish there was a little more lip on that pan just to give a little surface, but there's not. But I'm just going to hint at it here maybe. Okay, we've got an apple here. Now this is, I just took it out of the refrigerator, so it's got a little bit of moisture on it. But let's just hit that silhouette first. And I liken these silhouette shapes to Monet's haystacks. If you think of his haystack paintings, they started out with very rudimentary shadow note in opposition to the light. And here again, I'm just going to start it out with a simple kind of violet color in the shadow, and we can adjust that as well. Okay, and I like to simplify it first. Always big, simple shapes of color first. Okay, so there we got some. Oftentimes you'll find a color opposition sunlight on a brilliant sunny day with the blue sky. You'll have this juxtaposition of a color opposition. A cooler color from the sky influencing the cast shadows. Here you can clearly see on the apple the color opposition of the more violety tones in the shadow and the warmer tones of the sunlight. You've got the color opposition here, green in the shadow, influenced by the blue sky relative to the warmth of the light. So Impressionist painting, you're using the dynamic of the color opposition, not just the value distinction of light and shade. That, if anything, that's in a condensed fashion. That's the difference between tone-based painting, value-oriented painting, and the full spectrum color painting of the Impressionist painters. Okay, so I'm just getting some, like I say, it's kind of a big board, and I'm just condensing and I'm trying to do this in a rapid manner before my excellent camera woman, Sharon Littig, has to teach online. Sharon's a high school art teacher, so she's going to be teaching online this semester. All right, so let's state the light plane of that pink block, or purple block, or whatever the heck it is. It's some kind of warm, cool thing. Yeah. A lot of times in colors you'll find contradictory elements depending on how you look at it. Your eyes adjust to the reality. You look at it, and for instance, if you stare at a yellow block and then look away from it into a relatively neutral area, you'll see its color opposite. So, there's a lot of times I would call it multiple aspects in any given color area, and you have to choose those to suit your artistic purposes. All right, so there's beautiful, rich off note in the back. Off note is a terminology that the color painters up at Henry Hensche School in Provincetown used to use to denote a color that it was neither a primary or secondary color, but kind of a combination of many colors thrown together. Like this, I would call an off note. If you looked at that against a white board, you'd say, oh, it's some weird kind of gray. But in the context of a color painting, it has a life of its own. Now back here, I'm seeing this as a deeper note, off note than that, and it kind of has a violet pitch to it to me. So I can start with the violet. Here again, you drag the knife across the board with the edge of the knife, okay, and then you use the flat of the knife to mix the colors together. This is an old low Cornell knife. Unfortunately, they don't make them like that anymore, but you can, there's still some pretty good palette knives available. I'd say the, what are those ones we use, Sharon? The
Holbein.
The Holbein knives are pretty good little, you want a knife that has a little bit of flexibility to it. A lot of the modern knives aren't that flexible. I guess they make them that way so that they'll survive shipment or whatever. Nothing's as good as it used to be. I don't know though, some of these pigments, the quinacridone pigments weren't around in Monet's time, but he did have the advancement of the color sciences gave us the cadmium range of pigments. My teacher, Henry Hensche, used to maintain that the Impressionist movement was made possible because of the invention of the cadmium range of pigments. So here we have like a big shadow note foil for this light-filled area, and I can mix into that. I want to address these little cast shadows over here just to some degree. I need a knife with a little more grip to it here. Let's see. Let's just throw this up here. And like I say, I'm working a little more swiftly than I ordinarily would, because Sharon's wrists are getting tired from holding up the camera, and we want to be able to just give you a flavor. This is just to give you a flavor. This is, like I say, this is primarily for Nick, who does the wonderful, I won't pronounce his last name because I'll mangle it, but he does the wonderful cartoons for the Washington Post. And for other interested people, several people said, hey, do you teach online? I don't really offer online classes yet anyway, but you know, who knows, maybe I can figure out a way to do it. Okay, so we got, there's some cast shadow there coming in. Okay, I'm gonna, now usually when I paint, I back up a lot. Like I'll go stand 20 feet away and look at it. So I'm gonna do that now to see if I've created a mess. So, okay, I don't know if I've created a mess, but anyway, I brought a block study out that I did a couple of years ago out in the yard here, but this is, you know, this is like one of those cooking shows where they go, okay, and now here's the baked cake. But anyway, this is just a simple block study, and it kind of exemplifies some of the ideas I've tried to sketch out here. You'll see the cast shadow of the yellow block. Now you notice I've pulled the edges together a little more because this was just a one-shot study that I did, but I worked on it longer. And I went back and readjusted, like this was one of the main masses here was all the same color, and then I went back in and said, hey, this shadow plane is a little bit warmer, so I added some yellow to that. It looks like I did the same thing here. So there was adjustment within the masses. Okay, look at the background too. So this background might have started out as a single color like this, okay? And then I went in and started putting the variations of color within the mass. And that's the same kind of approach you use with a landscape. Can you see the landscape, Sharon? Okay, so the landscape, same idea. It started with big, bold, simple shapes of color. One color for the light, one color for the shadow. And then as the painting developed, this was after many, many sessions, I would go back. This is actually the front sidewalk in Eastport. And I would go back on successive days when the sunlight was the same. Now you notice, if you look at an area like here, this was all started with one color. Now, after repeatedly going back, and by the way, I would let the painting dry before I went back to that location, you can see I developed variations of color within the mass. Now, one thing to notice is that the values are pretty similar, even though you have color differences. That way, it holds to the mass, and that was the terminology that Hensche used. He said, you want your variations to hold to the mass. So here's a shadow area. You'll notice there's individual color variations. So that it demands a lot of study, a lot of analysis, and a lot of Hensche's paintings and paintings that came out of this tradition involve a lot of study, a lot of analysis. It sounds cold, but it's not. You could also call it an appreciation of nature, which leads you to understand these colors. I didn't bring out a portrait, but the same thing applies in portraiture as well. I can show that one of maybe I can show that one of you. Anyway, let me just look at this. So this is basically how we start. I'm just going to show you how to adjust the mass in one particular instance. Okay, so here, that's clearly not that purple. So one of the things you can do is to compare the relative vibrancy of the colors in a given still life. So we can see that yellow on the where the sun's hitting that yellow block is pretty brilliant yellow. So we can leave that, let's say. But then compare this. That violet-ish tone in the back is not quite that dramatic, correct? It's not as dramatic as this. This is a much richer, more beautiful, pure blue, let's say, in the middle of the bowl. But this is a relative off note. So what do we do to adjust that? We can look maybe to mixing across the color wheel or across the palette. And this is I don't like to think in terms of color theory, because if you think of the colors on a color wheel, you only get very limited options. You go the opposite of purple is yellow, you know. But there's a lot of options across the color wheel. So, well, let's see what happens if we put yellow in. That actually might serve the purpose. Let's see. So it's actually doing a pretty good job. I might squeak in a little orange, which is just one step over from yellow. Like I say, that's why I say it's not really about color theory so much as observation and experimentation. I'm seeing more of an orange vibe. So I'll put some orange in there, and I use the flat of the knife to stir it around. Now notice when we mix, I'm stirring around in a circle. See that? And what am I ending up with? I'm ending up with one color, okay? See, now that's getting a lot better. Now look, I'm stirring it around. It's a very aerobic exercise for you. You don't need a spin bike. You just need to get up in the morning and do your color studies. Okay, so let's do a little more orange over here. Okay, so now let's look at that. Now look, if I was to do a completed study, I would take this all the way out to the edge of the boards, okay? I'm doing kind of a snapshot approach to how I would do a color study to give you some quick understanding, okay? So that's pretty good. So right away, your eye, you know, sees the liveliness of the light key, the surrounding light effect, but your eye is not as agitated by the vibrancy of that purple now. It stands as kind of a foil for these more lively colors. And in fact, that's your visual experience as you look at the setup. You see it that way, okay? Let's just, we're gonna sign off in just a second because my cameraman's getting a little tired. And before I sign off completely, I'm gonna run in the house and get the portrait that I did of Sharon with a palette knife. Should you keep it running, or you want to turn it off and run it? Okay, I'm going to run in to do that. Okay, so I'm just getting this cast shadow of the apple here. A little bluer than that, so add some blue. Got this note coming in here from the back, from the block. So you can see I'm not, here's something that's interesting to note as well, is that I'm not using outlines to describe things. I'm letting the mass fill up the shape, okay? And the only reason I'm keeping the colors away from the edges so that I can mix back into those areas. Okay, but eventually you're going to want to pull all those colors together and see how they relate. Okay, so this will come. I'm just going to pull a few of these colors together. And I use a whiteboard because you don't want a toned board to already influence the colors. You want that pure white so that the color, and plus you're making very high key, which means very light colors. So if you had some kind of gray neutral tone, it would just kind of weigh down the value of the color. So see, eventually you will pull the colors together. They start to have more of an impact. But I would make another trip around the board and get these colors more accurately. But I'm just pulling them together. Like I say, I'm kind of condensing the stages of a painting for the purposes of this quick video demo. Okay, this is the kind of demo I would do when I would do in-person workshops. See how it starts to, as Hensche say, it starts to look suspiciously like sunlight as you develop it, pull it together. You get rid of the white, it starts to, Yeah, you can go back and clean up your edges and so forth. Sometimes you have light bouncing off the edge of a block. You know, Hensche used to call that the halation. You know, so you might have, you know, some colors jumping up into the shadow as a result of that sunlight bouncing off the surface of the light planes. All right, so let's see. So anyway, that's a brief idea. Now, you know, sometimes little illustrational visual cues can like all of a sudden, you know, oh, it's a little more like an apple because it's got the little, you know, natural little dimple there caused by the stem. Like I say, when you go back in, you can start to develop variations. It gets warm in the shadow as that light swings around, or maybe it's reflecting off that, well, I don't know where that's coming from, but there's some warm, so you can, you know, begin to break down the variations within the mask. I'm going to show you a portrait I did of Sharon. You want to keep rolling? Okay. I'm going to bring it right out. Here, I'll put it, let me put it right up, hold it right here. All right, there you go. So this was a palette knife study I did of Sharon, who's holding the camera. She doesn't always look this mean, but this, she's squinting because it was very hot and the sun was in her face. But this started with one color in the light, one color in the shadow, and then I came back on successive days when it was sunny, and we broke it down into variations of color within the mask. Here you can see very distinct color shifts within the shadow plane. The hair is always exciting and fun because it's all these wild relative cascading off notes, you know, and hopefully it effectively suggests the sunlight. Okay, and that wraps up my my intro talk. Thank you.